Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jill Willett, and I'm coming to you from UNC's campus at the Cannon Flagler Business School. And thanks for tuning in to listen to our replay of the webinar that we just hosted, the secrets and struggles of a successful product launch. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Scale School, I want to take just a minute and tell you a little bit about what Scale School is, and then we'll hop right into the webinar replay. So Scale School is a program of the UNC Entrepreneurship Center, which is part of the Cannon Flagler Business School. And Scale School was created because we know that there are a ton of different tools and resources for companies that are in the process of launching, or when you're building your kind of business plans and some of those pre-launch phases. But once you're a few years in and you've got a company that's actually scaling and growing at really rapid rates, there are not as many tools and resources that are available. And we know that it's kind of a unique set of skills that you need to be able to lead a company successfully through a lot of those periods of scaling and rapid growth. So we at the Entrepreneurship Center felt kind of uniquely able to provide some of that support for leaders of scaling and growing companies. And that is how Scale School came about. A typical Scale School course is 5 to 7 weeks. It's all virtually now, although we hope to get back in the classroom soon. And it's on topics that are very specific to scaling and growing companies. So that's things like developing a sales process that scales, that's marketing essentials, building inclusive organizations, operational and financial forecasting, building and leading cohesive teams. So there's a lot of things at a leadership level that you will find available to you through Scale School. And I think one of the most important things to highlight is that these courses are designed with action in mind. So these are anything from theoretical. What you learn in your course one day, we're going to give you the tools and the ability to actually implement the very next day. So this is designed for people who want to learn and implement very quickly. So let's go ahead and get into the webinar. You are joining us for the replay of the secrets and struggles of leading of successful product launches. I'm really thrilled that our speaker today is Chris Morrison. He's a Scale School instructor and has worked with so many different companies to help them bring new products and services to market. And we're really excited to be interviewing him during this conversation today. Sean Ramsey is our head of marketing at the Entrepreneurship Center. She's a very successful entrepreneur in her own right. She's worked with hundreds, if not more, of clients around marketing and PR, and we're really excited she's here with us. So she's going to be interviewing Chris for the webinar today. We had, like many of us in this Zoom world, a little bit of a hiccup, and we hit record about 5 minutes into the presentation. So I wanted to give you a little bit of context, and then now we're going to hop right in. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you'll come back and see us at Scale School.
It was really interesting. It was a technology out of UNC where Scale School's out of, and Bill had his product idea was to go into the clinical space, working at the bedside in the hospital and supporting cardiologists and assessing patients' risk. And we started doing a little bit of customer discovery, and one of the things that he was having trouble doing the customer discovery with the cardiologists he was looking to speak to, and we had a conversation about, what's he doing with this technology now? And he said, well, I've got a couple research partners, a bunch of research partners, and we're using it. Well, why don't you start your discovery there? And one of the things that was really interesting was that he went and talked to his research collaborators who he was giving his technology away to for free in collaborations. And he talked with 3 of them. 3 out of 3 told him that they would rather pay him for a commercial product than get his free research product if he could get a quality considered. So this is, he was actually, he hadn't even stopped to ask that question. But when he started probing into that, he found out, hey, here was a problem that he was helping people solve already, and they were actually willing to pay him for it. So probably the biggest thing I see that distinguishes a successful launch from a failed launch is kind of this obsessive, compulsive attitude around understanding my customer and understanding it very early, and then pushing that even further and pushing into this question, are they willing to pay? One of the things I do all the time when I'm launching products is I try to get people to pay me for for my services or my product as early as possible as I can in the conversation. Way before most companies would think about getting paid, I try to push to that point in time. And there's lots of ways to start testing that. So,
Okay.
but that's a pretty, I mean, from success or failure, that's kind of the one place. It's this excessive compulsive focus on the customer and understanding that customer at a very, very deep level. I was talking with someone else just, and you can, once you wind me up, I don't stop. But
that's all right. This is fantastic. And I'm sure everybody is enjoying it.
So I was
this is what we're
talking
here
with
for.
a prospect a couple weeks ago, and I was just coaching them. They were pre-launch, and I was talking to them how to have a customer discovery interview. And I said to them, one of the things you need to know about customer discovery is you got to get to the depth you have to have with conversations to start understanding the customer almost better than they understand themselves. Is you have to have at least a 45-minute conversation. And she sort of was flabbergasted, and she said, your first conversation with a potential prospect in the discovery you can go deep enough to have a 45-minute conversation. So I said, not only can I, but you actually have to, or you're not getting the level of data that you need early on.
Thank you so much. So how many people in the audience, just you can comment in the chat window, or if you're on video, do a show of hands. How many of you had been involved with the launch that skipped this very important step that Chris just talked about, this obsessive compulsive understanding of your customers and their needs? So how many of you have been involved in a launch that jumped right in, developed a product without really understanding if there was a need for that, or if there were customers interested in that product? Is anybody willing to share that? I know I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs over the years, and I know that, this is a very common challenge that I've seen over and over again. So
yeah, I hope so. I saw Danielle raise her hand. Maybe she'll share with us, but this is kind of a ubiquitous issue. It's just not with the new founder. I see this happen over and over again in very established, experienced businesses. It's a very common step, and you cannot overdo this step because you never know enough.
Yeah, and the process is never done. Even as you've launched the product and you continue to market the product or refine, the product, then you need to continue understanding your customers and how they're using your product. Danielle, would you like to share some of what you've experienced?
Sure. A few years ago, I worked alongside the founder of a startup helping high school students get into college. And I remember, so she was amazing and creative and moved fast, amazing qualities in a founder. And we see that a lot. But that definitely can actually come with shiny object syndrome. And so she would have an idea for a new program, and then we would just do it. And then it wouldn't really land for people. And I could see that being much more successful in having conversations with our existing customers and getting a lot of valuable information there.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for referencing shiny object syndrome. That's certainly a common thing that I'm sure a lot of us have seen over the years. Wouldn't you agree, Chris?
Yeah, that one. And the other one I find is the enamored in what they're doing syndrome, where you talk more than you listen. That's the other challenge I see, especially scientific founders get into, is, the shiny object syndrome is bouncing all over the place, but then also the one where they get so passionate, excited about what they're doing that they lose the connection with the customers, be able to hear and listen and learn.
Great. And I see that Tony Gomez commented in the chat window that he is guilty of some of that for sure. He said eventually he learned not to develop cool ideas he would think would be useful and rather let the customer tell him what they need. So I see a lot of people are kind of jumping in and can certainly feel some of the pain that we've talked about. So, now that we've spent some time talking about this very common challenge and how it can make the difference between a successful launch and a failed one, Chris, would you mind talking about some of the other common struggles that leaders will face during launches?
Wow. Okay, so I hadn't thought. So I'll call this the Excel pro forma syndrome. And I don't know. So here's I've written Excel performers on my revenue plan for startups. And one of the challenges that I get caught up in when I do that is I start believing the numbers I'm putting down on paper, that they're actually real. And the truth being is that if we're truly doing something disruptive and innovative and something for the first time, almost everything we have planned to do is based almost purely in assumptions. So this belief in our plan and our planning is one of the biggest challenges I see struggles. I had and I call it executing the launch plan. You sit, you take the 3 to 6 months before going to market and you put together this plan. And the day that you launch, you have this big celebration and this big PR, and you put out, and then you start executing the plan, forgetting that we actually made that plan up, and if it's disruptive based on assumptions. So that's one of the biggest ones. I was working with a client about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago there was about 6 months, 12 months post launch. And they brought me in to help them because they were struggling with customer satisfaction. And they had come up with a plan and they were executing that plan to build a revenue stream. But what they weren't paying attention to was the back end of the plan and making sure that when they closed customers that coming out the back end were satisfied customers. And they started missing their revenue. They started missing the revenue numbers. They got pressure from their investors to ramp up. And they doubled down and they stayed executing this plan. Well, the problem with that is that they're compounding an issue that's already in place, which is a flawed plan based on assumptions, and they kept doubling down on the plan. A long story short, they let go of their VP of sales, they let go of their chief business officer, eventually got rid of their CEO and brought in a new management team.
Wow.
But and this particular, we get trapped in that we think we're in execution mode when we're actually not. We're actually in discovery mode. I was thinking about, I came across this decision framework called the Kinefin, and it's spelled CYNEFIN. And it looks at 3 decision stages, and there's 2 ones that I tend to focus on. One is it's called complicated decision making, and the next one's called complex decision making. And in a complicated decision process, and this is where we are when we're in, from a sales perspective in established products in the marketplace, we can lay out a plan from point A to point B, and if we have special knowledge, we can actually lay out that whole plan because we have enough knowledge and data and history and understanding to have to lay out the plan, and then go about executing that plan. And that's what I see a lot of companies, they put together a plan and then they start marching from point A to B and they start executing the plan. And when we're launching disruptive, innovative products, we're not in a complicated decision framework. We're in a complex decision framework. And in a complex decision framework, going from points A to B, if there's 10 steps from points A to B, you actually can't figure out what the plan is to go from step 2 to 3 until you have the data from going through plan step 1 to 2. So if you think about that decision framework, going from the complicated, you can actually execute a complicated plan. In a complex plan, you can't execute. You've got to just learn and discover. So it becomes this iterative model. So that's one of the struggles. We get trapped in this mindset of executing versus discovery and learning. And that's so. And then if you actually make, and that's a critical shift as a sales team, as a marketing team, as a launch team in the company, we've got to shift from this mindset of we're executing a plan to discovering what the plan should be. And this is particularly challenging when you bring experienced sales and marketing people that aren't used to working in a launch or startup environment, because because their world in established companies with established products, they work in a complicated decision framework, and that's what works there, and they can't make the transition. They get stuck there. So then if you actually make this shift from execution to discovery, then the question becomes, okay, what are we trying to discover? It's kind of so what do we focus on if we're not executing? And if you look at startups, or if you look at any company launching a new product, what they tend to focus on is the metric of success is revenue or sales. It's every sales team. It's ubiquitous.
Yeah, and those are a couple of the points that you talk about in the downloadable resource. And I actually am going to share a link to that. But this is the downloadable resource, and Chris talks specifically about utilizing a complex versus complicated decision framework. He talks about the mindset of discovery versus execution. He talks about measuring success in time and not revenue, and a number of other points that we're talking about today. So I really encourage you guys, it's a free resource. I encourage you guys to go and download that. The link is included here in the chat window. It will also be included in the follow-up email. So please take advantage of that. Chris put a lot of time and effort into developing that, and it's really pretty valuable. I've been doing marketing for years, and I was really interested to read some of this stuff, and it certainly reminded me of a lot of experiences I've had over the years. So another thing I wanted to talk about, Chris, is in some of the things that I've heard you say and do, you talk about beachhead marketing. Can you talk a little bit about that concept and, maybe how, beachhead marketing and why it's important to pick one for a product launch and, why that's important?
Yeah, so I think one of the most challenging things we have in bringing a new product to market is picking what we call in business school our beachhead markets. What's that entry point market? I actually like the term entry point better than beachhead personally, because the idea of being a point, being very targeted. So, and this is kind of backwards from what we're all taught and trained, because we're looking to go after big markets, big segments, especially when you're going out and raising funding. You want to show you have a $500 million market or $1 billion market. But the truth is that it oftentimes starting small is the best way to get big. And probably a real simple example of this, and I can give you lots of reasons why this is so important, and I will, but a good example is this is Facebook. I didn't learn about Facebook until it was this big social networking instrument, or whatever you want to call it, software on the internet. But Facebook started at Harvard, and then it didn't even go to all universities. Then they just picked some specific Ivy League schools to then move it from Harvard to some other Ivy League schools. And then from there, they went to all universities. And by the time they had perfected that, that's when it actually became a tool for all of us. And so, you think of Facebook be this big, huge company, but they actually started very small, very niche. And and this is a big issue. And I think Danielle started talking about this as shiny object syndrome. If you're bouncing all over the place and going kind of where the market or wherever the opportunity takes you, there's one thing we need to be able to scale a company. And this is what Scale School's about. From a sales perspective, there's one thing we need, and we don't have it at launch. It's a repeatable sales process to execute, or that's from a sales perspective, but from a repeatable business model to execute. And if you're jumping all over the place and you're not focused, one thing that I can guarantee you cannot create repeatability in that space. And the narrower you get, there's some particular advantages. One is you can be an expert in a very small area, which increases your value. The narrower you design your markets, the higher the pain problem you can address. If you address large markets, you dilute the pain of which you're selling into. If you narrow it down, and then the other thing is when you launch new products, and this is 100% of the time true, is you're going to make the most mistakes in the first 6 to 12 months because you're doing something new for the first time. So if you're addressing a very high pain problem from a customer standpoint, you give yourself leeway to make these mistakes and still be successful in the marketplace. And then the other thing, from a marketing standpoint, it's much cheaper and much easier to scale from a marketing going after a small niche market than it is going after a broad market. If I've got to market to 100% of the people, or I'm doing this with a project with a client, go after 100% of the optometrists and ophthalmologists in the United States, or go to a very specialty small group. So going after 40,000 versus going after 2,000 is going after the 40,000 is much more costly effort than going after the 2,000.
And doesn't that go back to the point you made earlier about understanding your customers? Because the more time you spend on a specific target market, the better you understand them, right?
And that is dead on accurate, Sean. And the thing is, early on, what you can't do is you can't afford to have unhappy customers in the marketplace. So this focus narrow means that you can focus in, understand them really well, but also not just understand them, but service them and address their needs better than anybody else in the market. It's also, here's a sneaky one. It's how you compete with the big players in the marketplace in two ways. One is if you're going after a big player in the marketplace, they can cover the whole marketplace well. You cannot. So you can pick out a piece that you can service much, much better than they do, and you can become an expert and become a champion in that little space. The other thing, and I was talking to a good friend of mine about this just today, is you can stay in stealth mode when you do that. So you can't, if you go after the whole marketplace and point your arrows right at the big player, you're going to piss them off. And as a big player, they can just stomp on you. But if you go after a piece of the marketplace that isn't big enough for them to care about, you can actually infiltrate the marketplace from the inside. And it's kind of like infecting an elephant as a flea. By the time they realize they're sick, the game's over. And
wow.
So this is actually how you can shift the marketplace from the inside and compete against the big boys and not get their attention enough that they stomp on you.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. So I know you mentioned a repeatable sales process, and I don't know if that's a concept that a lot of people on this call are familiar with, and you talked about how some of the more, younger companies bring in these more experienced salespeople and, how there is a difference in how they need to approach that. Can you tell us a little bit more about, a repeatable sales process and how that may be different from what most of us are familiar with?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, Sean. So the problem is, so the repeatable sales process is exactly what you think it is. And it's exactly what the sales process would be for an established product. That's not the issue. It's not the issue of the repeatable sales process. The issue is that, and this is particularly happens when you have experts coming, sales or marketing experts coming in from big companies. The problem is, and we talked about the difference between complex and complicated decision making. You cannot know, if you're bringing disruptive, innovative products to market, you cannot preconceive what the repeatable sales process is going in. You have to discover it. So the problem with the repeatable sales process is launching a lot of products with conventional thinking. It's kind of a hidden blind spot, is that we assume we have a repeatable process going in, when the truth is we cannot. Literally, you guys gotta get this. You cannot have a repeatable process going in because your plan's based on assumptions. You've got to actually discover that repeatable process. So the issue is not that they're different; they're actually the same. The problem is in launching innovation and startups is that a lot of times we assume we have the right process, and we act as if we have the right process, and it takes us away from going through the discovery to get to a repeatable process. It actually, this misconception or this misperception is probably a better way to put it, prevents us to getting to a repeatable sales process and prevents us from getting to scalability. And this goes back to the whole conversation, to shift from execution to discovery mindset.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I know that I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about Chris's class, but we can kind of wrap up this interview portion. Chris, is there anything else specifically you wanted to talk about before I invite people? I'm going to invite people once again to join us in the chat window and tell us about, one or two specific challenges that they're struggling with. Then we can pick a couple of folks to kind of explore that further with.
So the last thing I say is we've talked all over the place, and I've talked a lot of conceptual things in the class. We're actually going to get down to work and get working onto the details. And the primary focus of the course will be identifying your gaps in having a repeatable sales process, and then start filling those gaps. That's one thing. But what I'm more interested in is start getting people's questions. I'd rather get in a dialogue or two with some folks that want to talk about, particularly if there's any challenges you're currently working on today that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so please take a minute again. I know some of you may have touched on some of that already, but if there's a lot of comments, so it's easy for those to get lost. If you could take just another minute to enter maybe a couple of your specific problems that you're struggling with, or specific things you'd like to talk to Chris about, and then we'll pick a couple of volunteers. In the meantime, I'd like to tell you guys just a little bit more about Chris's class, and Chris can join in here too. So again, Chris's class is called Leading a Successful Launch, Bringing New Products and Services to Market. That class starts on Tuesday, April 14th at noon, and it's for 5 sessions. It's designed for people who are leading efforts, particularly sales efforts to launch a new product or service. Some of them may have been through a launch before. They've made some mistakes and they want to do it better this time. Some may have never launched a product or a company before in their life and don't know where to start. So it really appeals to a wide variety of people involved in the launch process. Throughout the course, Chris will lead you through some of the things we've touched on today, including identifying the right customers for you to focus on first, creating a plan to launch something that is ready to roll out in your organization, how you should be measuring and tracking your launch, how that's going, and how you can adjust easily at the first sign of challenges. And again, the course runs for 5 sessions. It starts Tuesday. I think I had the date wrong here. It starts Tuesday, April 14th at noon. The registration fee is normally $799, but for those of you who joined today, we're going to give you a little extra incentive. And for the next 48 hours, we're going to be offering $100 off. And I know Aurora shared that link previously, and we'll share all of those links again before the end of this. And you will also get an email following this within the next 24 hours with a replay link to this conversation, information about how to register using that discount, and information about the downloadable resource that we've talked about as well. So let's take a look at folks who have commented. So I see that Benton Moore, for example. Benton, where are you? Are you available to talk to us?
I am. I'm in San Diego.
Okay, great. Well, Benton, thank you so much for joining us today, especially coming to us from San Diego. So I know you specifically asked about suggesting altering customer discovery with social distance challenges, which is certainly a timely discussion point for all of us. So Chris, do you want to talk a little bit with Benton about that and maybe share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, Ben, thanks for jumping in. And I love your city.
Everyone does.
How can you not, right? So actually, I just finished up a discovery project for a client, talking with ophthalmologists and optometrists. And over the years, so when I do customer discovery, I'm more interested in the quality of the interview than actually being face to face necessarily. And there's a quality and a piece that you get out of doing them face to face that you cannot do over the phone or Zoom. So there is but generally speaking, from a customer discovery standpoint, I haven't seen a huge difference in this recent go round, which I did 100% virtual. And I will say, compare doing phone interviews versus Zoom. Zoom is much better for a number of reasons. One is obviously you get some of that face-to-face interaction. The second piece is I love the ability to tape them and go back and rethink, because when I'm doing customer discovery interviews, it's not any individual interview that's critical, though there is some very critical things that come up in individual interviews. But what I'm looking for is starting to identify those qualitative patterns in the interviews, those what I call threads that start ringing true across multiple interviews, that start giving you a sense of what the broader market conversation is. So honestly, for me, I did not see a big change. Now, what I will tell you is one thing that's been consistent across all my interviews is preparation for interviews is absolutely critical. And preparing how you conduct an interview so you limit biasing people's comments. A good example is I was talking to a retinal specialist in this last go round, and she was referred, it was a double referral. I had a friend that referred me to her mom, who was an ophthalmologist, that referred me to her. So she was and the first question I asked her in the interview was, are you doing this as a favor for your mom, or was there a particular thing that brought you to this conversation? So before I even asked her anything or shared anything about what I was doing or what my client was doing, I just wanted to get if there's anything that piqued her interest. And her response to that was a market opportunity that as a company we had not even considered. It was a complete blind spot to us. So I think that's more important, how you prepare for interviews, and then how you design your interviews so you don't bias the information you're getting as best you can. And as soon as you start interviewing, you're biasing. So, you can't avoid bias, but you minimize it. And here's a little trick that I learned a couple of years ago. That's probably the best thing I ever learned about. And guys, write this down. This one's absolutely brilliant. It took me 20 years to figure it out. I start all my interviews with now is I'm going to ask you everything and anything. And here's another point. I never sell during any of my discovery interviews. But I'm going to ask you everything and anything. If there's anything you're uncomfortable answering, just let me know. We'll move on to the next question. So that does two things. It gives them control of the conversation, and that's how I start building trust right out of the gate. That's how I can have very deep discussions with people very early on, and I can ask them anything and everything. But the other thing it does is it frees me up to ask them everything and anything. So I found that my conversations, it gives me the freedom or the permission for myself, because I've given them complete control, and it's given me the freedom. That has opened up the depth of my conversations immensely when I open that whole thing. So does that answer your question, Benton, or help?
It's very helpful. Thanks for that hack. I was typing in and actually writing it down verbatim.
Was there a particular problem or concern that you had that underlying that question that you wanted to get to?
No, it's I've seen it become somewhat of a cop-out for entrepreneurs not being able to do customer discovery. And the flip side of that is I've seen it as an opportunity to reach decision makers that you normally couldn't, because they're home with their kids and happy to have some professional dialogue. So I've seen it both ways, and I'm just curious what you're seeing in the field, and if you had any hacks for it. And that's a great question to ask.
So here's the other one is I tell them I'm doing discovery interviews. I never cross that line between discovery and selling. Absolutely do not do that. You break the trust in the conversation, and that's what you're trying to build.
Great.
So it's still about question design and process, right?
It's still about question design process, and probably the most important thing is the reason I do so much preparation is so I can just listen and learn in the conversation. I'm never thinking about what I'm asking them. I'm listening. And one of the most important things I find, and the best interviews I have, is I have a term, listen to be surprised. I am actively listening to be surprised, or listening to uncover my blind spots. And you can't do that if it's structured or you're controlling it.
Those are great points. Benton, thank you so
Thanks.
much for volunteering. And Chris, thank you for answering his question. So we have a few other people. So Sam, is it Sam Sibeli with Cleary? Is that correct?
Hi, yeah, it's clearly.
Hey, Sam.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I'll let you ask your question versus me reading it out of the chat window, and then
Yeah, sure.
give Chris a few minutes to respond.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Thanks
Hey, Sam.
so much for offering this. We have the benefit that what we're doing is offering a sales decision tool or a decision-making tool for sales and marketing teams. And we were created by a handful of marketers. So there is some amount of understanding inside, and we've been really trying to have some of those conversations to get further development. Through some of those conversations and our proof of concept conversations or interactions, we've discovered that there might be a real opportunity to work with teams, marketing and sales teams that are already working with a particular kind of technology suite. But now the problem is kind of like finding those with that current suite. We know that about the size that we need to be able to offer those recommendations based on everything. It's just, how do we go about finding those that already have that? So would love some help.
Wow. Okay. So that's always a tricky question. I'll tell you the best place I think. So one is you just a dilemma, right? You've narrowed it down. You've kind of gone this small because you find this niche that you really sings with, and the value proposition really lands with them and aligns. So I would go back in the customer discovery mode. Let me ask a question. How many of those customers do you have today?
Just two. So
the starting point I would go is go back to those two and ask them, how do I find more of you? Because the problem is trying to figure that out is going to be challenging, but my starting point is going back to the customer and getting them to help you, point you in that direction. So beyond that, the other thing I would do is I would get all the smartest people you had in a room and just start putting everything up and just do a clean brainstorming session. And then take it, and I've done this with clients before. You do it blank, and you write 10 different ideas on how to identify those people. Then you kind of try to rank those ideas, and say, here's my top 3, and here's why I think they're a top 3, and then design really quick, simple, inexpensive experiments to prove or disprove your thoughts. Because a lot of times it just comes down to what I call the spaghetti method. You got to throw stuff up against the wall and see what sticks and see what doesn't stick. And what I see companies get trapped is they do too much around planning. So if you do that session, lock everybody in the room for 1 hour, 2 hours, come with your list, and leave that room with a plan that over the next 30 to 60 days to test your top 3. And in 2 months period of time, you'll know if 1 or 2 of those work or not.
Sure.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, thank you.
So
thank you, Sam, and thank you, Chris. Sure. There is at least one other person I'd love to get to, if you don't mind, and I'm going to ask Jewel Thomas to ask her question. But I saw quite a few people ask something similar, or referred to the fact that they were either involved in a grant process or some type of R&D programs. And Jewel asked a great question about frameworks specifically for those types of technologies. So Jewel, are you still with us?
Yeah. Oh, so I'm here.
Okay. Oh, hey, Jill. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. No problem. Yeah, I hope this is on topic, but I just figured with a lot of UNC people in the audience, it might be. So I guess I'm just wondering, when you do when you're in the mode of doing government focused R&D, there's kind of a specific sales process for that, where learning the patterns of interest and that type of thing, and the people that you're applying to. You can do institutional research and read the books that they publish about themselves and that type of thing, get some sense of what they're thinking. But that mode is just a lot different from sort of some of the processes that you're describing, where you're sort of trying to define and the market kind of on your own. And it just kind of seems like, so I think the general version of my question is, it seems like you have to develop specialized skills to be able to sell the two different types of markets. And I'm kind of wondering if you have thoughts on how to think about that. And then there might be more specific direction or ideas that you could suggest for thinking about making those transitions.
Yeah, so honestly, Joel, I'm not a grant guy and haven't gone after grants, so I don't know. I mean, at a very fundamental level, I don't know how to answer your question. So I'll start off by there, and now I'm going to answer it. I know that doesn't mean, but they're customers just like you're a customer. I mean, they're customers just like any other customer, and you have to figure out what problem they're trying to solve, or what they're trying to accomplish, or what their job to be done is that you're speaking to. And one of the problems that you have there is they're behind a veil, so to speak, and getting to them. But I would figure out proxies to figure out, how do you get into the head of someone like that? I don't know that. I don't have a good answer to your question. Now, one of the things I will tell you, there's people that are experts at getting grants submitted. Maybe this is where I would go. I would go to the people that have done this over and over again, have created and become quote unquote experts on getting SBIR and STTR grants. I mean, there's companies that are just mills of doing that, and there's experts inside those companies. I go talk to them, because if you could go talk to 2 or 3 of them, that will give you years and years of experience and knowledge that would take you to gather any other way. That's probably the place I would start on that.
Great. Well, thank you, Jewel, for asking that question. And thank you, Chris, for offering some helpful advice. Do we have, I think we have just a couple minutes for somebody else. If anyone else has a question they'd like to talk to Chris about, do we have any volunteers?
Can I actually point to one? Someone asked a question about, Tony Gomez. Do you ask about pricing? Tony, can you ask that question? I'd love to have that discussion.
Yes, exactly. So sorry, let me fix my camera here.
Yeah, I think
so. One of the things that come up usually is, how do you figure out pricing for some product? The way we've done it now is, we know a salesman who knows a salesman who, looked at what they're paying for something else, or they know something that we don't, that they're able to tell us, and then but if you have a new customer, you kind of don't have that inside help. How do you figure out pricing, and when do you do that?
So I do it so stay on with me, Tony, so I can see your face, please. So I do it, every interview, every project I do, as early in the project, I have pricing questions. That's one of the reasons I say up front, I'm going to ask you everything and anything, because it gives me the freedom to have all that question. I just asked this in an interview of one of the retinal specialists. I said, if you had that product and it did all the things we talked about that you want to do, how much would you be willing to pay for it? And she gave me a number that was 50 to 70% higher than our list price for the product we were going to market with. And by asking it before she had any idea, she told me what the value, and then she justified why that was valuable to her at that price point. So in answer to your question, yes. And I never tell them anything. I always start with the question, how much would that be worth, or what problems does that solve? How much does it cost you to solve that problem today? What are you paying for competitors' products? What would you consider competitive? I ask everything and anything, because you've got to, that's when I say you got to get close to the sale early on. You got to get into that data early on, because it's not only whether that you have a problem that they want to solve, but are they willing to pay you to solve that problem? So yeah, I go deep, and this is absolutely critical that you start diving deep into this conversation. Go back to 2 or 3 people you've had discovery interviews with already. Tell them you want to send them an email and say, listen, I want to have a price conversation with you. Here are the things I want to talk to you about. You don't have to answer any of my, or just say, hey, listen, I want to do a discovery interview. I need 30 minutes of your time. Tell them up front that they don't have to answer anything. If they're uncomfortable answering anything, don't answer it, and then have that discussion. I guarantee you'll open up a whole new world to you on pricing and value-based pricing and what it costs them and how big a problem you're actually solving for them. Does that help, Tony?
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. That puts at ease, or gives us more confidence being able to do that. So thank you, Chris.
Go for
Great.
it.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Chris. So it's about time for us to come to a close. I just want to remind everybody, I think Aurora is going to put the links back in the chat window, but I want to remind everybody you will be getting an email in the next 24 hours. So look for that. It will have a replay of today's conversation. Be sure to look at the chat window as part of that, because there are some recommendations there. I also want to give a shout out to Danielle from Raleigh Founded. If she's still on the call, she's one of our partners for Scale School. So yes, thank you. I wanted to specifically call that out, and also wanted to remind everybody for the next 48 hours, there's a $100 discount on registration for today's class. So that's one of the links that Aurora will share. And again, look for that email. Let us know if you have any questions. And we look forward to seeing you guys again. Don't forget to download that resource. It's a fantastic tool to use. And let us know if there's anything, if you're interested in learning more about the class, if you have any questions, if you're interested in speaking to us at the eShip Center. And I know Chris has graciously offered to have a couple of quick conversations. If you're interested, email us. And actually, I'm going to share Jill's email address. Sorry, I had that handy. Now I don't. Aurora, do you have that? Here I go. Want to share that in the chat window as well. So if you'd like to email her, she may be able to answer your questions. And if not, she may be able to connect you directly with Chris if he's available. So thank you guys so much. I hope you found it helpful, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Come join us.
Thank you. Bye, guys.